Hey guys, how we doing? So, I noticed that Mother's Basement has done a video about Darling in the Franxx called How Darling in the Franxx Wrecked Its World Building. So before watching this, I went into the description just to see what, maybe he's talking about. And he mentioned episode 19 of Darling in the Franxx, which I was like, which one's that? And I realised that's the backstory with the Doctor. Now, minor spoilers here. All the way through Darling in the Franxx up to episode 19, the whole series was really interesting because you were trying to figure out what was going on and nothing was actually laid out on a plate for you to see exactly how the world was built. You're just trying to pick up little pieces as it's going on, and I really liked that. I really loved it. And then you're constantly wondering what's going on with these, why is this here, blah blah blah, and it made it really interesting. Nothing was told straight up matter of fact how it was, and it just added to this narrative and the story and added intrigue. I think what's going to happen here is episode 19 just straight up just goes, right, this is what happened in the past, this is what happened, this is what happened, this and blah, 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 backstory, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't mind that, but I can understand why it would be annoying that then all of a sudden it goes, right, it explains everything. And I think that's where maybe Mother's Basement could possibly be going with this video. But again, I don't know. I think that's just where I'm going at, because then episode 20 goes, oh well, actually these things were these, and blah blah blah, and what you're piling is actually this, and da 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 da, and it doesn't actually explain everything still, but the intrigue would have. I feel like if they kept it going as it was, but then it's just freaking A1, so they obviously had to go unlock and kill style ending, which I didn't mind at all either. The last episode I thought was fantastic anyway. But anyway, How Darling in the Franxx Wrecked Its World Building.
Toward the end of last season, I made a video praising Darling in the Franxx for its subtle diegetic world building.
Right,
a drip feed of information unveiled naturally through the day-to-day actions of its characters without the need for detailed explanations as to how everything fit together.
Yeah,
it was a shining example of how things like costume and environment design can tell a story all their own, sometimes more effectively than a narrator doling that information out. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Since the series peaked with episode 15, Franxx has been sliding downhill fast.
Oh, no, I loved
the battle
it.
Sakuga that was a big part of the appeal of the first half of the show is just gone. And that's fine. It's good for series to slow down and shift tones in order to sell that there's been a big change in the state of the world, but the emotional drama that supplanted the action is kinda not the best. Our main characters, 02, Hiro, Ichigo, and Goro, have all gotten to a comfortable place in their emotional arcs a little too early, leaving them as mostly static, boring entities during this stretch of the story. And their drama, which was the driving force of the show, is replaced by a rushed wedding arc about two secondary characters who just aren't as interesting.
I loved it.
Still, anime have recovered from worse Act 2 slumps than this, so it's not like all hope for the series is lost. But after episode 19, we are getting dangerously close to the point of no return. In 24 minutes, Darling in the Franxx throws 18 episodes of slow, meticulous world building out the fucking window, with a bloated, poorly thought out exposition dump that ignores almost every rule of show don't tell, barely disguised by an awkward, ham-fisted shift to the perspective of Dr. Franxx. As a story in itself, episode 19 is a poorly conceived, borderline insulting train wreck. And as part of the broader story of the show, it only serves to make its world less interesting by answering questions about it in more or less the least satisfying ways possible, and reducing a potentially interesting, enigmatic character to little more than a one-note stereotype. This is one of the worst episodes I've seen of an anime that I actually like, up there with that dumb thing from Code Geass, the first of many dumb things from Charlotte, that dumb thing from Kato the Right Answer, and that one dumb episode of that one show that I never stopped talking about. And only one of those shows, Geass, managed to pull itself back from being unwatchable garbage after hitting that low point. So I'm not saying that Franxx is doomed to have an awful conclusion. It still has a lot of potential, and this episode doesn't really step on some of its strengths like action, but my hopes for it are not high, and I'd like to run through everything this episode does wrong in order to explain why.
Okay, go on.
Darling in the Franxx episode 19, Inhumanity, serves two major purposes: to finally explain how the world reached its current post-apocalyptic state, and to shed some light on what motivates the enigmatic Dr. Franxx, who is, I'll remind you, at least guilty of human experimentation, child abuse, torture, and some light eugenics. Needless to say, the question of what could drive drive a man to do such things and think in such extreme ways is potentially really interesting, and I'd argue worth devoting a whole episode to answering. But not when the answer is spelled out in the first minute of the story and turns out to be as phenomenally fucking stupid as... At the start of this flashback episode, we learn literally two things about Dr. Werner Frank, as he was then named. Firstly, before we've even met him, he's already guilty of some concerning violations of scientific ethics all the way back in 2025, long before the world went to shit. And secondly, he doesn't believe in God, which is literally the only explanation we're ever given for why he doesn't care about ethics. Well, that, and he gets results. This is, unfortunately, a pretty common trope in media. The nihilistic, godless scientist with no moral compass who plays God. It's rooted in the stereotype that all atheists are amoral, which is something that, as an atheist myself, I find to be pretty goddamn insulting at the best of times, and worrying given that there are people out there who are legitimately still dumb enough to believe it. But putting aside my personal issues with this trope, it's just lazy, a flimsy crutch used by writers who can't be bothered to think up more interesting, I suppose a better reasoning would be better, one that basically disregards how human beings actually think. It's as bad as the cult leader who's just doing a bunch of evil stuff because God and not for any ulterior motive. And it really is the only explanation that we're ever given here. In a later conversation with his one-note love interest Milsa, who we'll get to, Dr. Frank further explains that he wants to see humanity reach the pinnacle of its evolutionary potential, wondering if that would make us gods, or if it would just make us no longer human anymore, which is a pretty standard motivation for your generic boilerplate Hollywood atheist character. And right after being asked if he thinks humans will become gods, he clarifies once again that the last hint at Dr. Frank's motivations comes when he confronts the Klaxosaur in her lair and is immediately entranced by her beauty, falling in love with her. Now, the unintentional subtext of this, given the character design, is really fucking creepy, but the intended subtext is just as bad for my money. It's implied that Franks is in awe of the technology and biology of the Klaxosaurs. He said as much when he was examining the old Klaxosaur corpse, and he sees her as being a step up the evolutionary ladder from humans, the godlike being that he's been hoping to observe his whole life. His obsession with the Queen inspires him to do arguably the worst things that he's done so far in the story, creating and torturing 02 along with a slew of other presumably failed clones. The show is saying that every horrible thing he does is motivated, or at least enabled, by his godless worldview. Now, you might think I'm reading too much into this or not giving the show enough credit for the small developments that it gives his character throughout the episode, but again, he had this extreme unethical mentality before the apocalypse, before the death of his wife, or any of the other events that could have pushed him to this extreme. And his personality doesn't really noticeably change between when we meet him and when he meets the Queen. There's nothing else presented in this story that could really explain his actions. So, with the mystery around Frank stripped away, we're left looking at a cardboard cutout of a mad scientist, and that's just the beginning of the flat, lazy writing in this episode. Milsa, Frank's love interest, is, well, actually even saying love interest is too charitable. Milsa is a plot device, a box ticked by the writers to give the Doctor an artificial tragedy and backstory, and make this episode seem like it has a more complex plot than it really does. Their relationship isn't developed naturally at all. It just kind of happens off screen. They have two conversations about science and their immortality research with zero apparent romantic tension or subtext. Then they go out to dinner and she says, by the way, I love you, let's get married, and they do. And then she dies, and Frank shows exactly 2 seconds of grief about her passing before she's reduced to a literal statistic that paved the way for the Franks program. And throughout all of this, and even after it, he doesn't actually grow or change as a person at all, which is fine, I guess, but if this tragedy doesn't change him, and the romance isn't properly developed beforehand to be emotionally resonant for the audience, it's kinda pointless. You could just as easily show what a hard bastard he is by killing off a regular friend or family member to the same response. So why does this episode dedicate so much screen time to Milsa and to their relationship? Because it's a framing device used to disguise the fact that this whole thing is ultimately just one big info dump. The major milestones in their research and relationship all happen to conveniently coincide with major developments in the world's progression toward the apocalypse. Because the narrative is nominally focused on these two characters, it feels slightly less like an old man dryly explaining the history of the world at the beginning of the JRPG. Even though functionally that's exactly what it is, and it has exactly as much impact as a text crawl would have on the actual progression of the show's main plot, which squeaks forward by like an inch through the little B-plot cutaways to the squad in this episode.
Yeah, after they've lost the memory.
Personally, I think the show would have been a lot better off establishing this history through present reveals instead, like what Gurren Lagann did.
Yeah,
but if they did have to do this to make the show work, honestly, I think I would have preferred they just drop the pretense and devote the whole episode to exposition, because then maybe they could have used the extra screen time to write something that,
didn't do this with this episode,
makes sense. There are four major developments that lead to humanity's eventual war with the Klaxosaurs in this episode, and none of them hold up to scrutiny. Firstly, there's the political rise of the scientific group Ape through the proliferation of their Magma energy technology, which is deeply flawed on two fronts. Firstly, this is kinda obvious, but magma is just really hot rocks, and while research into geothermal energy has shown there's a lot of potential in converting that heat into usable electricity, none of it has indicated that magma could be the secret sauce for solving immortality, or that extracting it from the earth could somehow cause the world to turn into a big desert. Since last I checked, neither plants nor the water cycle rely on magma miles below the Earth's crust to function. But, you know, this is an anime, and anime isn't exactly known for its scientific accuracy, so okay, let's just rename the magma to magic rock juice, or
which is exactly what it is,
and assume it has nothing to do with the real thing. Fine. There's still one major flaw with this plot point, though. The show tells us that between now and the year 2025, Ape, a group of anonymous scientists with no national origin, managed to totally revamp the world's energy industry to be more efficient and cheaper, and gained immense political influence in the process, which leads to them eventually becoming humanity's rulers, and that's just not how the world works. At all.
Well,
the problem with this plot point is that the livelihoods of companies and entire nations depend on the world's current oil-based energy infrastructure, and there is so much technology from cars to electric grids that would need to be retrofitted to use magma energy instead. And there is no way in hell that the oil companies would just let a new resource render everything that they've done.
Would they not though if they were offering out immortality?
As soon as they got even a whiff of the potential of magma energy, fossil fuel companies would be sending legions of lobbyists to get its development tied up in red tape, and creating ad campaigns to incite fear or at least wariness of the technology in the general public. And we know that because that's what they've done with every alternative energy source that's ever threatened their bottom line, from wind to solar to especially nuclear. I'm not saying that Ape couldn't get past those eventually show that magma extraction technology is objectively superior, but there's no way that they could do it in less than 7 years, and in order to accomplish it, they'd need to already have a lot of money and political capital. But the way that the show explains their rise to power, they literally do it backwards. This inconsistency is particularly frustrating because the way that magma energy destroys the Earth seems to be, at least in part, an allegory for what's currently happening to our climate because of fossil fuels. So apparently the creators of this show are trying to comment on that problem without having even the faintest understanding of the obstacles preventing it from being solved. Forgive me, but I'm starting to get the impression that Darling in the Franxx might just be really, really dumb. And it doesn't stop there. The second big development on the road to the apocalypse is Dr. FranXX's patented Immortality formula, which has its first successful trial after just 5 years, and 6 years after that, 70% of humanity has already gone through with the treatment. Everyone just kind of rolls with it. I mean, do they really think there'd be no religious opposition to this, or crackpots claiming it's a conspiracy of some kind? I mean, shit, it takes on average 6 years and 3 phases of testing for a new drug to just be eligible for FDA approval. The review process itself can take years after that, and that's for normal drugs. We're talking about a procedure that fundamentally alters human physiology.
We're talking about an anime.
Leading-edge technology that people don't fully understand, with the known side effect of rendering everyone who undergoes it completely sterile. There is no way that this.
We're talking about an anime and trying to set up what happened and why the next few episodes go on a mad tangent.
And I know that's kind of nitpicky, but it's these little details that make or break a sci-fi world's believability. If you're gonna create a work of speculative speculative fiction, especially one that starts in the near future and has a really complicated world, you've gotta do enough basic research to ensure that it feels like something that could actually happen in our reality.
No.
Otherwise, what's the point of writing science
that.
fiction at all? Why not just set your story in some unrelated fantasy land or a galaxy far, far away? Story problems aside, there are a lot of unfortunate
It's set on Earth, so it has to be realistic.
The way that this immortality treatment is handled, but that's a whole other can of worms that
They're
needs to be
giant
unpacked
freaking
on its own.
robots
So
that have
let's just
faces that
focus on the
smile and
shitty world
emote.
building for today. The third development on the way to the apocalypse is the emergence of the Klaxosaurs and the adoption of apes' plantations as humanity's new home. Now, the plantations have pretty much the same issue as the other technological leaps. Humanity is apparently just way too willing to accept them without resistance, but the giant robot dinosaurs do kind of explain why people might act more rashly than they usually would. The bigger issue I have with this is the Klaxosaurs themselves. This episode makes them seem really fucking boring. They appear out of nowhere, like kaiju or angels or titans or every other mecha anime monster needing to be taken down through costly use of nukes because humanity doesn't have a way to fight them. And everything that we learn about them from that point is just as generic. Klaxosaurs have such a cool, unique design. They look awesome, bots, one of the most iconic visual elements of this series. We're led to believe basically from moment one that they must have an equally unique and fascinating origin story. But nope, they're just remnants of an ancient pre-human civilization that used the series' specific plot MacGuffin before we did. So, anti-spirals, or
Atlanteans, that's what I compared them to.
Protheans, or, well, take your pick, really. I really don't think they could have conceivably come up with a less interesting explanation for the giant robot dinosaurs than this, and that's a real shame. Maybe there will be some kind of twist in regards to where they came from or their connection to ape in a future episode that will fix this problem, but I kind of have
it doesn't really fix it, but,
and now, at last, we come to the fourth and final big reveal about the history of the world that this episode doles out. The origin of the titular FranXX robots themselves, as well as their unconventional sex-driven piloting system. And big surprise, it's underwhelming and stupid. After studying a preserved Klaxosaur specimen, FranXX research reveals a way to defeat them, and as a result, he's put in charge of developing an anti-Klaxosaur weapon. And, okay, just for starters, we've established that he's a geneticist, not an engineer, so he's really got no place leading the development of a giant robot in the first place, but that's really just the tip of this stupid iceberg. Once they've built a fully functioning prototype robot, they start testing humans in it, and only after a lot of them die, including Frank's wife, do they discover that pilots need to have functioning sex organs and operate in pairs to interface with the machines and not go crazy. This is hugely inconvenient considering that most of humanity has already undergone the sterilizing immortality procedure, and it makes you wonder, why the fuck would they build a robot that way? Like, you're telling me that Dr. FranXX and his team successfully designed and built all of the mechanical bits needed for a bipedal robot, plus a mind-machine interface to control it, without actually understanding how the stuff that they invented works?
Yeah, because it's based off of the designs of the Klaxosaurs.
The technology ends up being totally unusable for most human beings, specifically because of another technology that Dr. FranXX also invented. I'm sorry, but that's a frankly unbelievable level of incompetence and oversight for someone who's supposed to be the world's smartest science guy. Now, there is an explanation for this. That they either based the FranXX robots on Klaxosaur physiology or built them around Klaxosaur cores or corpses. That would make sense of the female robot design, since Klaxosaurs have 2 X chromosomes, and explain why Dr. FranXX has no idea how they work despite having built them. But if this is the case, why wasn't it revealed in the episode? I mean, the narrator is the guy who invented these fucking robots. Are they intending to make a twist out of this? Because I hate to break it to you guys, but the whole "the robots are made out of monsters" thing has been done before. Specifically by a certain very famous mecha anime that your anime is supposed to be an homage to. So everybody is going to be expecting that reveal, and it's going to make for a pretty fucking weak late series twist.
I liked it.
Written yourselves into a corner because
they didn't play on it too much. That's what it was okay with.
Your super smart scientist character ends up looking like a fucking moron. I'm reaching a frustrating conclusion here, one that I really didn't want to land on. When I started writing the script for this video, I came in feeling like Darling in the Franxx is a good show, and this is probably just one pretty bad episode on the road to its conclusion. I mean, I've sat through worse and had it pay off. Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water springs to mind, but the more I write, the more I rewatch this episode and think about it, the more I hate this specific episode, and the less optimistic I feel for the future of this series. In finally revealing the backstory of FranXX that we've all been waiting for, episode 19 also inadvertently reveals that a lot less thought went into building this world than previous episodes hinted at. It seems like maybe the production design team put in a lot more effort in that regard than the writers, and the writers were just kind of being lazy by being vague. And the information that we can infer, which hasn't been revealed yet, points to a plot that may well be derivative and predictable right up to the end. Which won't be the end of the world, at the very least we'll get to enjoy some more cool action scenes and cute character designs before the series wraps. But at the start of this season, I was hoping for so much more than that. Well, maybe if I'm lucky, it'll prove me.
That was amazing episode when he stole all that clothes. I'm Jeff,
professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.
Now, I don't like disagreeing with people's video things that I've watched. Usually I'm just like, yeah, it's right. I think I'm just biased because I absolutely freaking love Darling in the Franxx. I absolutely love it. I'm literally only finished it like last night. But I feel like he should have done this video after the series ended and then could have done his like, you know, when he did with SAO, what's in the scene, ruining the whole series thing, if he felt like it had done that. But no, I'm sorry. I personally feel like it was necessary because, yes, I was kind of like, oh, that's taken a lot of away from how everything was subtly set up throughout the whole series as it was. We see the characters, we see the places they go to, the subtle conversations in the background. Even like there was one episode where people were like, oh, they don't know, blah, 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 and then you're like, well, what? I don't know what? And then, but then if this episode didn't happen, and we didn't have all that explained, then everything else that happens afterwards from 20 to 23, 24 is fine, 20 to 23, would just be like, what the actual friggin' hell is going on? This makes absolutely no sense. I mean, it was slightly convoluted, but it makes more sense because of how episode 19 was played out. Yeah, there was some forced like relationships within there, like FranXX and his wife and that, but then her dying and that. But then when you find out that the FranXX are what they are and this and the other, it does make sense. And so what if it's been done before? You know? Yeah, like people do it. People do similar things all the time, right? All the time. So what if it's similar? I enjoyed it, and that's all that matters to me personally. And I hope that you guys watch Darling in the Franxx and have the same opinion. So, okay, there's my food for thought. Thank you very much for watching, guys. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what to watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys, yes, all of you guys, next time.